They sold their house, dissolved 2 businesses, and moved onto 11 acres of Missouri land with no electricity, no plumbing, no running water, and no prior experience doing any of it. Doug built the cabin himself, from trees on the property, in 90 days, using construction techniques from the 1800s that he learned from old books. That couple is Doug and Stacy, the faces behind one of the most quietly influential homesteading channels on YouTube. And none of it would exist if not for a single conversation Stacy had in a classroom that made her look at every room in her house differently. By the end of this video, you'll understand exactly what was said, why it landed the way it did, and how 2 people with no farming background, no construction skills, and no safety net walked away from the life they had built, and built something else entirely from scratch. Doug and Stacy were not struggling when they made their decision. That's the first thing worth understanding. When most people imagine someone going off-grid, selling everything, disappearing into the woods, building their own shelter, they picture someone who had nothing left to lose, someone backed into a corner, someone whose old life had already fallen apart. That was not the case here. Doug was running a nursery business in the St. Louis area. It was functioning, it was producing. The work was hard, and finding reliable labor was a constant headache. But the business was real. Stacy was working in healthcare, a stable career with predictable income. They had a large suburban house. They had 2 incomes. By every external measure, they were exactly where they were supposed to be. But there's a specific kind of misery that doesn't show up in the metrics. The commutes, the bills, the processed food they bought because there was no time to cook anything real. The chronic tiredness that they both accepted as normal because everyone around them was tired in exactly the same way. Their own website describes it plainly. They were stressed out, eating toxic food, living in debt, and being sick all the time. The tricky part is that none of it felt like a crisis. It felt like Tuesday. Stacy has talked about this in interviews, the way modern life is designed to normalize exactly this kind of slow erosion. You're not dramatically unwell. You're just slightly off, all the time. Slightly foggy, slightly tired, slightly behind. You accept it because you don't have a comparison point. Everyone you know is living in the same pot of slowly heating water. That's the metaphor Doug himself uses when he talks about this period. The frog in the pot. The temperature rises so gradually that you never feel the moment when it became dangerous. But here's the part that changes everything. The change didn't start with a dramatic moment. It started with a class. Stacy enrolled in a holistic lifestyle coaching program. Her motivation at the time was practical. She thought she was already living well. She was exercising. She was eating what she believed was a healthy diet. The class wasn't an act of desperation. It was more like continuing education, a refinement. What she got instead was a complete reframe. The instructor walked through the ordinary contents of a home, the products people use every day without thinking twice. Air fresheners plugged into the wall, scented candles burning in the living room, plastic containers holding the food in the refrigerator, seed oils in every processed product on the shelf. None of these feel dangerous. None of them trigger alarm. They're normal. They're everywhere. They're in television commercials with families laughing. Stacy has described this moment with a specific kind of clarity. She had air fresheners in every single room of their house, multiple scented candles burning regularly. She had no concept of what seed oils were or what they did in the body. She thought she was doing everything right, and the class was showing her, methodically, that the environment she'd built around herself was working against her. The word she used in one interview was toxins. Not a vague, unscientific accusation. A practical, room-by-room accounting of what they were inhaling, absorbing, and eating every single day, and what that accumulation does to the body over years. Something about the specificity of that made it impossible to ignore. She went home and started making changes. Small ones at first. Swap the plastic shower curtain. Change the candles. Read the labels on the food they were buying. If she couldn't pronounce the ingredient, put it back. These sound like minor adjustments, and individually, each one is. But cumulatively, over weeks, then months, they started feeling different. Doug noticed it too. Less brain fog, more energy. The chronic background hum of feeling slightly unwell began to quiet. And that's when the decision was made. The one nobody around them. It is worth sitting with what they actually did here, because the summary version makes it sound simpler than it was. They sold the house. They dissolved the 2 businesses, which in Doug's case meant a nursery operation he had built and managed for years. They got rid of the furniture, the appliances, the car that was too big for what their new life would require. They condensed 2 suburban incomes and a full suburban household down to the cash from the sale of their property. Then they bought 11 acres of land in rural Missouri. Cash. Not a mortgage, not a land loan. They paid for it outright, which meant the financial pressure that follows most people into their off-grid experiments. The loan repayment clock ticking behind every decision was not present in the same way for Doug and Stacy. That was a deliberate choice. The debt they'd been carrying in the suburbs was part of what they were walking away from. Starting the next chapter with new debt would have defeated the point. The land was north of St. Louis, rural enough to build without running into building code interference. They don't publicize the exact location, and they've explained why. Privacy is part of the deal when you're documenting a self-sufficient lifestyle on a channel with 1 million followers. What they chose to build was a 600-square-foot cabin, not a large home that happened to be off-grid. Not a retrofitted farmhouse. A 600-square-foot 1800s-style log structure, the kind of footprint that forces you to be intentional about everything inside it. Every square foot matters when there are only 600 of them. Doug had essentially no construction background. He studied 1800s log home building techniques. He sourced timber from the property itself, and he built the cabin in 90 days. What happened next is the reason this story spread across the internet. The cabin has no solar panels, no wind turbines, no grid connection of any kind. That distinction matters, because most off-grid homesteaders in the YouTube space use solar as their bridge. It's technically off-grid, but the modern infrastructure is still there. Doug and Stacy rejected that entirely. Their water comes from rain. A 3,000-gallon catchment system collects what falls on the roof and stores it for drinking, cooking, washing, and irrigating. In a dry season, that calculus gets tight. There's no municipal backup, there's no well with a pump. What falls from the sky is what they have. Their heat comes from wood. Cooking happens on a Lehman's Pioneer Princess wood cook stove, a cast iron unit designed in the 1800s, still manufactured today. Their evenings run on oil lanterns. Their property has sheep, chickens, ducks, bees. The gardens are a mix of raised beds and a back-to-Eden-style growing system. They ferment, they forage, they process firewood for winter every spring and summer, because a winter without enough wood is not a recoverable mistake. Stacy once described a typical day: waking to the sound of animals, handling morning chores before anything else, cooking from scratch twice a day, managing the root cellar, doing dishes by hand, helping Doug in the woodlot. There's no dishwasher, no laundry machine with a spin cycle, no thermostat to set and forget. The physical work is constant. The planning horizon is longer than most people are used to thinking in. You're not asking what's for dinner tonight. You're asking whether the stores you preserved last fall are going to last until the garden produces again in May. Most people who know this story stop here. But the real story starts. Doug and Stacy didn't set out to build a media operation. The YouTube channel began as documentation, a way to record what they were doing and share it with people who were curious. Early videos covered the basics: how to build a chicken coop, how to make soap from scratch, how to manage a root cellar without electricity. The audience found them, and it found them in numbers that surprised everyone, including Doug and Stacy themselves. The reason, if you look at the comments, is consistent. People kept writing some version of the same thing. I didn't think this was possible. I didn't think someone could actually do this from nothing. The appeal wasn't just the homesteading content. It was the origin story. These were not people who grew up on farms. These were suburban office workers who had made a choice. That proximity to the viewer's own life made the possibility feel real in a way that a multi-generational farming family could never quite replicate. The channel grew past 600,000 subscribers, past 1 million. They built out their social media presence across Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, and X. They started the Homesteading Life Conference, an annual in-person event in Missouri where attendees come to learn directly from Doug and Stacy and other practitioners. They added a women's retreat hosted by Stacy. They became regulars on homesteading podcasts and at expos. Stacy has described herself as a holistic life coach with over 3 decades of combined experience in health and nutrition. The operation that began as 2 people with a camera and a log cabin became a full content and education business. Still run from the same 11 acres, still with no public utilities, but with a reach that extends across multiple platforms and into live events. She never talked about the hardest parts publicly, until now. Success on YouTube doesn't inoculate anyone from difficulty. For Doug and Stacy, the past several years have brought challenges that their early audience could not have predicted from the channel's origin story. Their content shifted, gradually at first, Then more visibly, the homesteading tutorials and lifestyle documentation that built their audience began to share space, and eventually, in terms of upload frequency, be outnumbered by videos with a different character, warning-style thumbnails, preparedness content with urgency language, commentary on political events, health policy, rural America, food systems. Their video titles in recent years include phrases like, "Rural America is under attack," "YouTube removed this video," and "We warned you for 2 years." That pivot divided their audience. Longtime followers who came for the composting toilet tutorials found themselves watching a channel that had become as much a political commentary operation as a homesteading one. The comment sections reflect the tension. Then, more recently, a fire. In early 2026, Doug and Stacy uploaded 2 videos. The fire started fast. Here is what happened. And after the fire, what is next? Starting over. The details available publicly are limited, but the framing in the titles, starting over, suggests a significant loss. This is consistent with the practical reality of living in a structure built from timber, heated with wood, illuminated with oil lamps. Fire is one of the foundational risks of this lifestyle, and Doug and Stacy have always been open about discussing it. They've also dealt with legal action. A lawsuit connected to their coverage of the Amos Miller raw milk story, the Pennsylvania farmer charged with federal food safety violations, who became a cause célèbre in the natural food community, was publicly disclosed by Stacy in a video title that reads, "We are being sued for the Amos Miller story." None of these are small things. Legal exposure, a property fire, an audience that split along the lines of content direction. These are the chapters that don't fit neatly into the origin story. And if you think that was surprising, stay with me, because this next part is why the whole story matters. There's a temptation, when covering a channel like this, to reduce it to its most dramatic moments. The fire, the lawsuit, the content pivot. But that framing misses what made Doug and Stacy's channel resonate with 1 million people in the first place. Most of those people are not going to move to 11 acres in Missouri. Most of them are never going to build a log cabin or collect rainwater for drinking. They know that. Doug and Stacy know that too. Stacy has said it directly in interviews. The whole point isn't to get everyone to do exactly what they did. The point is something smaller and more transferable. That the life most people are living is not the only option, and that the first step toward changing it is just noticing what's actually in the rooms you live in. That's what the class did for Stacy. It made the invisible visible. The air fresheners she'd never questioned, the candles she thought were cozy, the food she'd assumed was fine because it was on the shelf and looked normal. The simple act of questioning those things, running a diagnostic on a life that seemed to be working but felt wrong, was the turning point. Not a crisis, not a rock bottom, a class and an honest accounting. That's a much more portable story than sell everything and live in the woods. It's accessible to someone living in an apartment in Cincinnati. It's available to someone with 2 kids and a job they can't leave. The information from Stacy's classroom, the part that changed everything, doesn't require 11 acres to act on. What Doug and Stacy did with that information was extreme by most standards. They sold everything. They built a cabin. They have no utilities. They're dealing with fire damage and lawsuits and a polarized audience and all the complications that come with building something real in public over 15 years. But the seed of all of it was a conversation. One class. One instructor walking through the ordinary contents of a home and asking, "Do you know what this is actually doing to you?" That question, and the willingness to sit with an uncomfortable answer, is what changed everything. Doug and Stacy's story is not really about homesteading. It's about what happens when someone decides that the distance between the life they're living and the life they actually want is no longer acceptable, and has the courage to close that gap, even when closing it means starting from nothing. They are still doing it. As of 2026, they're uploading, hosting conferences, rebuilding after a fire, and navigating all the complexity that comes with running a media operation from a 600-square-foot cabin in Missouri. The channel is still active. The 11 acres are still theirs. Whatever the next chapter looks like, and based on their track record, it will be documented in full. They've already proven that the version of the story where you rebuild from scratch is survivable. The question this story leaves open is a personal one. Stacy knew something was wrong before she could name what it was. Most people in that position never take the class, never ask the question, never look at the air fresheners in the corner of the room and wonder. So here's what I want to know. Do you think Doug and Stacy made the right call walking away from everything? Or is there a version of their story where they could have gotten what they needed without burning the whole thing down? Drop your answer in the comments.